Bienvenidos a todos cafeteros, your home for Colombian football in English. Today we are going to look back on Colombia's performance during the Copa America 2024. And for that reason, I'm wearing my special edition Copa America Centenario Colombia jersey from 2016. The first of two times that the Copa America was hosted in the United States, and where you have a mix of CONMEBOL and CONCACAF nations in 16 teams competing in one big tournament. So 2024, the tournament that just concluded, is second time that has ever happened. Previously, other nations were invited, one-offs, two teams were invited to join the CONMEBOL nations, but this time we have a CONMEBOL CONCACAF tournament, and I'm very excited to talk about Colombia, how Colombia did in this tournament. You probably already know that Colombia are runners-up. They unfortunately lost to Argentina in the final, but we're looking at Colombia today, and we're going to go through the group stages, the knockout phases. First of all, we're going to talk about the tournament as a whole before I go into what Nestor Lorenzo did with the team, how he applies his strategy and his tactics to the squad that he's putting on the field. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk about a couple of players as well to highlight James and Cordoba in this sense particularly. But let's dive in and talk about the tournament itself. As mentioned, it's been the second time since the Copa America has been hosted in the United States. And it's a combination. It's the second time that there are 10 CONMEBOL teams and 6 CONCACAF teams. The CONCACAF teams having to qualify, while the CONMEBOL teams obviously are all there. All 10 are there. All 16 teams are drawn into 4 groups with 4 teams each. Colombia, certainly in a very tough group there with Brazil, Paraguay, and Costa Rica. Costa Rica being the only CONCACAF team in the group. And so it's even more of an accomplishment for Colombia to finish this group in first place after a win in the first opening game against Paraguay 2-1. Then they defeated Costa Rica clearly with 3-0 before drawing with Brazil 1-1. Then it went into the knockout stage, the quarterfinals. Panama was not a challenge for Colombia, 5-0 here. And then Uruguay in the semifinals. Colombia receiving a red card at the end of the first half, still winning 1-0 and advancing to the finals, having the chance to win the Copa America for the second time ever, 23 years after winning it for the first time, but then in overtime losing to Argentina, unfortunately. Now with that out of the way, let's look at Nestor Lorenzo's strategy, and then the tactic is how he applies that strategy in various games on the pitch. Nestor Lorenzo's strategy is centered around the main players, around James, about Lucho. He's all about offense-orientated play, and he's centering that around James and Lucho. And most recently, that hadn't happened until like about a year ago when James was substituted in during the first World Cup qualifying game against Venezuela. I was in the stadium, I was there, and the crowd just went crazy. James has got status still, and now more than ever after this Copa. But the fans were just into it the moment James joined the pitch. and James delivered. He performed in that game and then in consecutive games so that Nestor Lorenzo couldn't not make him a starter, right? So James wasn't originally a starter, but I think when he saw how the fans reacted to them, that they were fully supporting him, there was not a single person in the stadium who was against James, despite his recent performances prior to that, right? Prior to 2023, he wasn't really there. We're going to talk about the decline a little bit later. But in that game, he came on, he was there, he helped the team. And in consecutive games, he did that too. Then as a starter, and now during the tournament, I think he solicited his status. So Nestor Lorenzo's idea is centered around that. Nestor Lorenzo likes to change things up. We're going to talk about that when we look at the squad that actually played and talk a little bit about players that dropped out. One player in particular, I don't need to beat around the bush. We're going to talk about Borré a little bit. But Nestor Lorenzo likes to do consecutive changes whenever he sees the need. So he doesn't wait for a big failure or anything and then replaces half the team. He picks here and there, puts the puzzle pieces in play, but then how that unfolds in the tactic, let's look at the formation. Let's look at how Colombia actually plays. So let's get started with looking at how this Colombian team plays. Obviously in goal, you have Vargas, just a bank back there. You are playing with basically a 4-4-2. So you have the 4 back here, which in the first game, so we're going to look at the first game, how Lorenzo started this tournament. He started with Mojica here and Lucumi as a center back, Sanchez as the other center back, and then we have Munoz on the right as the right back. In general, that's how he started. Nestor Lorenzo had played a lot around in the defense here with Lucumi and Cuesta and others. Machado has been substituted and sometimes been a starter in the past. But yeah, for this tournament, he picked Mojica. Again, Lucumi and Sanchez forming the center back positions, and then Munoz. We have Lerma, who is the defensive midfielder, who we are going to talk about this in a second, who likes to go in and out, but a very strong performance by Lerma here during this tournament. On the left, or mostly on the left, they like to switch positions from time to time. We have, Rios on the right, and then John Arias. I have to put J here because we have another Arias on the team. John Arias on the left, the man that won the Copa Libertadores with Fluminense last season. And then undisputed captain here, James Rodriguez, as a number 10, with the number 10, a classical number 10, a big part to the success of how Colombia is doing right now and why Colombia had been undefeated for so long is Nestor Lorenzo's use of James. James doesn't work in every formation. You kind of have to use him right. And Nestor Lorenzo does so. He's known James for years. Nestor Lorenzo was an assistant coach under Peckerman, under Jose Peckerman, the other Argentinian coach here, from 2012 to 2019. Sorry, that's Borré in the first game. Again, I mentioned that briefly. We're going to talk about Borré and then Lucho on the left. Again, that didn't stay Borré for long. So we're going to talk about the substitutions Nestor Lorenzo made or had to make during this tournament. But yeah, the 58-year Argentinian coach, again, came back as the head coach after he was already assistant in the past. And he came back in June 2022. So he's been the head coach for Colombia for the past 2 years and went 28 games undefeated. He did so by, again, using James the way James is intended to be used. And by putting the right places here. Rios, who wasn't a really big part during the past year, during the World Cup qualifying stage. There was Uribe here many times, and like one game actually we see Uribe instead of Lerma, because Lerma was suspended by receiving 2 yellow cards. But let's look at what Nestor Lorenzo did here after seeing not much success, or in the case of Lukumi, who got injured in the first game, in the very first game, in the 23rd minute, got substituted out for Mina. You have Mina here in the 25th minute coming in, but then in the consecutive games, Mina didn't start. So what Lorenzo did was he took Lukumi out because he was injured, never came back, and there were hopes there that Lukumi would be able to come back, but never did. So instead, he puts in Cuesta. And then basically that was the defensive four here with Mojica, Cuesta, Sanchez, and Munoz. Munoz only not being able to play one game. The game in the final, because Munoz received the red card versus Uruguay in the semi-final in the first half, at the end of the first half. So versus Uruguay, you had him substituted out. And then in the final, we had, where do I put this? Number 4. And that's where the other Arias comes in, Santiago Arias. Bundesliga fans might remember him from his short stint at Leverkusen a few years ago. But yeah, Santiago Arias here in the final instead of Munoz, because Munoz got the red card. Cuesta became a starter. I think when Lukumi is back in full strength after his injury, for the next games in the World Cup qualifying stage, Lukumi will be back, in my opinion. We have Lerma. Again, Lerma only against Panama had to be replaced by Uribe. Uribe here had been a starter in the past. Rios kind of took his spot. But yeah, Uribe versus Panama, because Lerma had 2 yellow cards. Make this colorful here. And then Rios and Arias, John Arias, playing as number 8s here in this space between defense and offense, being used in the offense. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. James, undisputed leader of this team. Again, those are the starters during the tournament. And then how he's using the forward. So he's using Lucho as the left center forward, and then Borré started in the first game. But Borré, ever since he left Frankfurt, he joined Werder Bremen, and now he's in Brazil. He's not doing well. He didn't make it past the first game. He got substituted in, but after the first game, this became Cordoba. Cordoba here, that's why I did the 24 earlier, became the starter, and Borré basically out. But yeah, you have Diaz and Cordoba as center attacks. James here to distribute the balls, but also get the balls from back here. Arias and Rios, they're like escaping to the out, and Lerma filling those positions. Lerma, depending on what James is doing, there were times when James fell back. So depending on the game, that's where we're going from strategy to tactic, right? So the strategy is basically you have a 4 defense, well, Vargas here anyways, but 4 defense, you have 4 in midfield. That's very flexible because depending on where Lerma and James went, that's where Arias and Rios went. So you had sometimes 3 or 4 in offense and in defense, depending on if you have the ball, obviously, as well. But it's mostly the formation against the ball. When Colombia recovered the ball, it kind of depended on where they recovered the ball. If they recovered the ball somewhere in defense here, let's say the defenders recovered the ball and there was no pressure, there was no pressing, no gegenpressing, no nothing from the opposing team. And you kind of had the formation settling in on both sides. You saw James coming back, like in this game here against Panama in the first few minutes. James dropping back, picking up the ball, and then distributing it. While James is doing that, you have the other one. You have Lerma going up, taking James' spot. You have sometimes Cordoba and Rios switching. You have Diaz and Arias switching. So it depends. So the goal was always to have 4 in attack-ish. You have the midfield positions here. When Rios, Arias, or Lerma went up front, you had Munoz or Mujica also going up front. So that with the ball, you ended up with a 2-4-4 position. James picking up the ball and then either distributing it in here or passing it to the front, straight here, like against Panama, in other situations as well. And kind of being the playmaker, but a playmaker that also works backward. Well, not backwards. I shouldn't say works backwards because he doesn't actually do too much on defense. A little bit. He's like interrupting the first pass here. But when I mean he works backwards, means he runs back and picks up the ball if needed. He's all over the pitch. He goes back on both sides in multiple situations, gets the ball, distributes it. Even if Munoz or Mujica have the ball and go on a run, James has to adjust and go back. But he doesn't demand the ball all the time. Early in the Panama game, we had this build up by the central defenders. James had to drop back because Mujica and Munoz were already committed. And so James drops back to receive the ball and allow them to move up a little bit more. John Arias and Rios are staying back in midfield as they've seen that Munoz and Mujica are already committed offensively. So they keep their positions in central midfield. The pass goes from James deep to Munoz, who's taken on the role of right winger. The pass goes in the middle and you have the midfielders who can potentially convert that second ball, even though here it isn't successful. And now we'll look at a different way that this offense can function as well. How you use Arias and Rios, again, they're going over the sides on the other side. If Rios has the ball here, right, he brings it in, Arias goes in, James sometimes as well stays back. You have Lerma, who also goes to the front. Against the ball, that doesn't work so well sometimes because you have Mujica and Munoz, who are both very offense-orientated. Very much so that you end up with Cuesta and Sanchez as the only defenders here. That's kind of how the goal got created against Argentina, how they received the goal against Argentina in the final that made them lose the Copa. You ended up with Cuesta and Sanchez in defense, and you didn't switch back. You had everyone else was committed. Mujica, Arias. Well, in the end, you didn't have. They were substituted out. But what happened in principle, because even though the names are different, and that's also one of the things I want to discuss, the bench, right? So at this point, James was already out. Diaz was already out. You didn't have that stability in midfield anymore. so that the bench, who isn't that strong, is not a strong bench, didn't switch, didn't go back, didn't switch when they lost the ball, when Colombia lost the ball, and Argentina executed that counter attack perfectly. You can see here like 3 players on the Argentinian side defeating like 6 if you take the other defender here in parts of the midfield. You have 6 Colombian players, only 2 of them committed really to the pass, but then you had the Argentina player being free, being available, and then the fast pass through the middle completely took that midfield apart in that formation. So that's a problem when you have the wingbacks committing too much and not being able to switch back fast enough. But yeah, that's the game that Nestor Lorenzo lets the Colombian team play. Again, for the future, I think we will see Lukumi back. I think the rest might stand. So there might actually be the starting 11 in the World Cup qualifying stage moving forward. I think Borré lost his starting spot for good. Cordoba, the man here with Lucho, with James, John Arias and Rios. I've seen John Arias starting on the right. I think due to Rios being stronger on the right, I think he switched John Arias to the left. Lerma on defense. You always have Uribe here, who you can substitute in for Arias, for Rios, for Lerma as a backup. And then you have Mojica, Sanchez, and Munoz, Vargas given as a starter here. But yeah, that's how Colombia plays 4-4-2 against the ball, and it becomes a 2-4-4 with the ball. And a very interesting game here. You have very fluent positions in midfield. Even the forwards, even Lucho drops back a lot of times, where either Rios fills his spot. I've seen Lerma filling his spot when Lucho is coming backwards. But those 6 positions here are very fluent with the wingbacks moving up. And then whoever is not in the box kind of dropping back as a backup defense here in case they lose the ball. Again, against Argentina, that didn't work so well because it was also mostly the bench playing at this point after the game going to overtime. Many of them were tired after a long tournament and a long game. But yeah, that's basically the Colombian play in a nutshell. So let's talk a little bit about James first and foremost. The player of the Copa America of this tournament, best player, voted to the best player of Copa America 2024. Unfortunately, not crowned as Lucho does here in this picture with the title. Again, runners-up is a great accomplishment. I'm sure everyone would have loved to see Colombia actually succeeding in the final as well. There were many factors that played against that. There was a strong Argentinian team who, for the past years, maybe a decade or so, has been the benchmark for CONMEBOL soccer. But in this final, it was doable. Many factors. I think the huge delay, 83-minute delay prior to the game, and a prolonged halftime of almost half an hour contributed to losing rhythm. Argentina is a more, how do I say this, more European-oriented team, like more European style. They're more settled, they're more calm, they're more maybe professional. What Colombia lacks in those aspects is maybe, the mental, people call it the mental toughness. I don't think it's mentally tough. The Colombian team is very tough mentally. I think what that means on the pitch is that they lose the rhythm. They lose the rhythm of just playing freely, playing without worry. And that flow stopped in the tracks a little bit there with the delay. We will never know if the final would have unfolded differently if it was kicked off on time. Had it been kicked off on time, had there been a decent halftime and not like this epic show of, again, this is like Super Bowl style kind of show for a football match. I don't know if it was needed, but the tournament is hosted in the United States. So, of course, they're going to do those things. Despite all of those things, I think Colombia put on a decent performance in the final. Not their best performance during this tournament. I don't think you can credit Argentina's defense or Argentina's play that much with stopping Colombia. I think Colombia kind of you could feel there were stakes on the table, right? I'm very interested how the next game unfolds that we're already going to see on September 10th this year in Barranquilla, Colombia, Argentina in the World Cup qualifying stage. So that's a game where it's a competition match. It's not a friendly. And how that game unfolds, because I do think Colombia will be better in this match, not having the big pressure. I mean, there's still the World Cup qualifying on the line, but they're going to qualify anyways, whether they win or lose, in my opinion, because, 6.5 spots, 6.5 seats in this year's World Cup qualifying stage, and Colombia still being undefeated in that competition. But I think the final, like in their minds, this is the final, this is it. It played a little bit into it. The delay played into it. And so that the team couldn't play that freely as they usually would, as they have done in the past. But I wanted to talk about James. Let's talk about James Rodriguez, one of the biggest comebacks in football history, most certainly in Colombian football history. And this man has transformed. He has just become the leader, the captain. I mean, he had been captain previously, but the way he does it now is in a way more humble way, in a more decent way, a more team-oriented way. And we're going to look at an article in Semana here from before the final was played. So we'll talk about the comeback of James. First of all, let's look at his career so far. His breakthrough came during the 2014 World Cup, and then he joined Real Madrid. And everything worked pretty well. They are under Ancelotti. Coach Ancelotti trusted James. So James went to Bayern Munich to follow Ancelotti there, and James did all right under Ancelotti. And even under Heinkes, James was a key member of Munich's Bundesliga title run in 2018. But then Niko Kovac took over Bayern Munich. James' time was up again. Kovac did not plan with James, and so Munich did not pick up the purchase option. That's when the downfall started. Fast forward, James spent a year at Everton, then went to Qatar, and a year later to Olympiacos. James was not part of the national team anymore at this stage. He went to Brazil a year ago and has been playing for Sao Paulo since. He hasn't always been a starter there, and he had a decent season, but his contract is up next summer to summer of 2025. After his comeback at the Copa America just those last few weeks, Sao Paulo actually said that James could stay for that final year of his contract if he wanted to. But it's more likely that they want to make some money now that he's hot and let him go. It's probably also best for James. So why is James playing so much better in the national team than at the club level? In my opinion, that's a mix of two things. First, he's been humbled but still receives tremendous support from the team, coach, and fans. He's now appreciating this support. Nestor Lorenzo admires James. Ancelotti admired James. James needs a coach that admires him and uses him correctly. James is a classic number 10. He won't work if the match isn't tailored to his needs. He won't work if he doesn't feel the support. Lorenzo didn't always start James, but he communicated why, and that he would love to start him if James was fully healthy and in shape. James worked on that and received the trust. Lorenzo switched the team system to work for James, giving him the freedom to move around the pitch wherever he wants. Lucho and the second forward as targets up front, and the midfield that first looks where James is before moving into their positions. So what's a good landing spot for James? A club team where the coach is empathetic, believes in James, and builds a system around him, but also someone who doesn't give up if it doesn't work for a couple of games. It'll be a very interesting summer and interesting to see where James ends up. And the second player I want to highlight here is Cordoba. Cordoba, who's been playing in Russia, kind of forgotten on the international stage, not only with the ban of Russian soccer internationally, but in general, like not in a league that people have a focus on. So Cordoba making a start here, being a starter, becoming a starter during this Copa America competition. We'll see how long that lasts. Boré just lost his spot after the first game, after the Costa Rica game, and Cordoba was there to fill that spot. He's still not, or might not ever be at the level as James and Lucho are, but he's that third part in that last step attack in that forward position. So we'll see if Cordoba can hold his spot. I want to a little bit highlight him because I don't think many people know about his career, about him prior to coming on and now being a starter. And obviously a big stage like this is always an opportunity to present yourself. So let's hope some teams in leagues where he can compete at a higher level have paid attention and might sign him and get him out of Russia. But let's talk about Cordoba. John Cordoba is 31 years old. He was born on the Colombian Pacific coast in the department of Chocó. He started his career in Envigado, a smaller Primera A Colombian side where he played for 3 seasons before he went to Mexico. And then a season after that, he ended up in La Liga, played for 2 teams there before he found his way to the Bundesliga in 2015. He played for Mainz 05 before joining den 1. FC Köln, where he played first and second division and made his way to Hertha. He played for Hertha BSC for 1 season before he was then sold to Russia, where he's been since. He's been playing for the past 4 years at Krasnodar in the Russian Premier League. And after the Ukraine war started, I think he was on leave for half a year or so before he joined that team again, and he's been playing there since. Pretty successful, scored 35 goals over the last 3 seasons, 29 of those in the last 2. He was a goal scorer for Cologne, where over the course of 2 seasons, he scored 33 goals in the second Bundesliga and in the first between 2018 and 2020. His contract is up in 2025, the summer of 2025. So 1 more season in Russia. If they want to get some money out of him, they probably will sell him this summer, especially after a successful Copa America. I think there's value there where they might intend to sell him. Otherwise, his contract is up in a year, and potential teams are probably already reaching out to him to see where he's going to go next, because I don't think he's going to extend his contract in Russia. But the future will tell. We'll keep an eye on Cordoba and other players as this summer break unfolds. And with that, I want to say thank you for watching this video. Like and subscribe the channel if you're interested in more Colombian football, as the World Cup qualifiers are getting kicked off again in September here. And we're going to put a small focus as well on the women's sub-20 tournament that's going to get kicked off here in about a month in Colombia. And we're going to look at that. But subscribe to the channel, like this video if you enjoyed it. And until next time, this was Todos Cafeteros. Thank you so much for watching.